Christmas is often described as a time for family, a time for celebration, and a time to return home. But in December 2010, what should have been the start of a festive holiday became one of Britain's most high-profile murder investigations. A young woman disappeared just days before Christmas. The search for her dominated the national news. Public speculation grew by the hour, and before detectives had identified the real killer, an innocent man found himself at the centre of a media storm. This is the story of Joanna. Before we begin, we'd like to say that this video is intended for educational and documentary purposes. We'll be covering this case respectfully, focusing on the investigation, the facts established in court, and the lasting impact it had. Our thoughts remain with Joanna's family and everyone affected by this tragedy. Joanna was born in Hampshire, 1985. She studied landscape architecture and built a promising career designing outdoor spaces. Friends and family described her as intelligent, warm, adventurous, and deeply loved. In 2010, Joanna was living in Bristol with her boyfriend, Greg. The couple had recently settled into a new flat in Clifton, one of the city's most well-known neighbourhoods. Life seemed to be going well. Christmas was only a few days away, and Joanna was looking forward to spending time with her family. No one could have ever imagined what would happen next. On the evening of Friday, 17th December, Joanna finished work for the Christmas break. She met colleagues for drinks to celebrate the start of the holidays. Witnesses later described her as being in good spirits. Nothing appeared unusual. At around 8 p.m, Joanna left the pub and began the short walk home. Along the way, she stopped briefly at local shops, purchasing a pizza, cider, and a bottle of wine. The transaction was captured on CCTV, would become one of the final confirmed sightings of her alive. Investigators believe Joanna arrived home shortly afterwards, but sometime later that evening, something happened inside or near her home. Exactly what occurred would only become clear months later. The following day, Joanna had arranged to meet friends. She never arrived. At first, those close to her assumed she may have changed her plans, but as more time passed, concern quickly turned into alarm. Meanwhile, Joanna's boyfriend Greg had been away visiting family for the weekend. When he returned to Bristol on Sunday evening, he immediately noticed something wasn't right. Joanna wasn't home. Her phone wasn't being answered. The food she'd bought remained inside the flat. Her coat and boots were missing. There was no sign of a struggle. It was as though she simply vanished. Greg contacted the police and a missing persons investigation was launched. Detectives began searching Joanna's home, surrounding streets and nearby woodland. Friends, neighbours and colleagues were interviewed. Search teams expanded their efforts as concern continued to grow. As news spread, volunteers joined police in searching parks, roads and open spaces across Bristol. Posters carrying Joanna's photograph appeared throughout the city. Police appealed for anyone who had seen her after the evening of 17th December to come forward. The investigation quickly became one of the UK's biggest news stories. Television crews gathered outside Joanna's flat. Reporters provided hourly updates. Every rumour, every possible lead, and every witness account became headline news. Behind the scenes, detectives worked methodically. They reviewed CCTV footage, examined phone records, and reconstructed Joanna's final known movements. But despite their efforts, there were very few clues. 8 days after Joanna disappeared on Christmas Day, 2010, a member of the public made a heartbreaking discovery. Joanna's body was found beside a country lane near Longwood Lane in North Somerset, several miles from her home. The discovery transformed the investigation. This was no longer a missing persons inquiry. It was now a murder investigation. Police secured the area and began extensive forensic examinations. Although investigators withheld many details from the public, they confirmed that they were treating the case as suspicious from the outset. With enormous public interest and pressure mounting, detectives faced an urgent challenge: find the person responsible. But as the investigation intensified, attention would soon fall on someone who, despite the headlines, had committed no crime at all. As journalists searched for answers, one individual found himself under intense public scrutiny: Joanna's landlord, Christopher Jeffries. His appearance, mannerisms, and proximity to the investigation led to widespread speculation in sections of the media. Newspaper published sensational headlines. Television coverage fueled public curiosity. Yet at this stage, police had not charged him with Joanna's murder. The investigation was still ongoing. Nevertheless, public opinion was beginning to turn, and the consequences would be profound. By the end of December 2010, the murder of Joanna had become one of the biggest stories in Britain. Police were under enormous pressure to resolve the case. The public wanted answers. The media demanded updates, and detectives were working around the clock to follow every possible lead. On 30th December 2010, police arrested Christopher, Joanna's landlord. The news-dominated newspaper front pages and television broadcasts. Many people assumed the case had been solved, but detectives knew that an arrest was not the same as a conviction. Over the following days, officers interviewed Jeffries extensively. His home was searched. His movements were examined. Forensic specialists worked to establish whether there was any physical evidence linking him to Joanna's murder. As the investigation progressed, something became clear. The evidence simply wasn't there. After several days in custody, Christopher was released without charge. For detectives, this was an important moment. Rather than forcing the investigation in one direction, they returned to the evidence. Every CCTV recording, every forensic sample, every witness statement. Nothing was ignored. Nothing was taken for granted. It was this methodological approach that would eventually uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Christopher Jeffries' life had been turned upside down. Although he had not been charged, sections of the media had already portrayed him as guilty. His appearance and personality became the subject of intense public commentary. As forensic scientists continued examining evidence from Joanna's flat, the location where her body was discovered, they identified DNA that did not belong to Joanna. This would become one of the most significant breakthroughs in the investigation. The DNA profile was compared against national databases. At the same time, detectives began looking more closely at people connected to the area surrounding Joanna's home. One name stood out quickly: a neighbour who lived only a short distance away. His name was Vincent Tabak. Tabak was originally from the Netherlands and worked as an engineer. Unlike Christopher Jeffries, he had attracted almost no public attention. There had been no media forensics surrounding him, but behind the scenes, investigators were quietly building a case. Police began examining Tabak's movements on the night of Joanna's disappearance. They reviewed CCTV footage, analysed phone records, and continued gathering forensic evidence. The more they investigated, the more the evidence pointed in one direction. Most importantly, forensic testing linked Tabak directly to Joanna. This wasn't based on speculation. It wasn't based on rumours. It was supported by scientific evidence collected during the investigation. On 20th January 2011, just over 1 month after Joanna's disappearance, Vincent Tabak was arrested on suspicion of murder. His home was searched in detail. Computers, clothing, and items were seized for examination. As questioning continues, investigators confronted him with the growing body of evidence. Eventually, Vincent Tabak admitted that he had been responsible for Joanna's death. However, he disputed the circumstances. He claimed that he acted without intending to kill her. Prosecutors argued that the evidence told a very different story. The stage was now set for the trial that would examine exactly what had happened that December evening. While detectives finally had the man responsible in custody, another story was unfolding. Christopher Jeffries, the innocent landlord who had been publicly vilified, began taking legal action against newspapers that had falsely portrayed him. His case would become one of the most significant examples of the damage caused by trial by media. It also helped spark wider conversations about journalistic ethics and the responsibility of reporting during investigations. By January 2011, detectives were confident that they had identified the person responsible for Joanna's murder, but there was still one final step. The evidence would now be tested in court. For Joanna's family, it meant reliving one of the darkest periods of their lives. For the prosecution, it was about proving beyond a reasonable doubt what had happened on the night of 17th December 2010. And for the public, it was the first opportunity to hear the full side of the story inside the courtroom rather than through headlines. In October 2011, Vincent Tabak stood trial at the Bristol Crown Court. He admitted that he was responsible for Joanna's death. However, he denied murder. Instead, he pleaded to manslaughter, claiming that Joanna's death had occurred accidentally during a struggle. The prosecution rejected that explanation. They argued that the evidence showed he had intentionally killed Joanna after attacking her. The jury listened to weeks of testimony from detectives, foreign experts, and other witnesses as they carefully examined everything that had happened. The prosecution presented forensic evidence linking Tabak to Joanna and challenged his account of the events. They argued that his explanation did not fit with the evidence gathered during the investigation. After considering all the evidence, the jury reached its decision. On 28th October 2011, Vincent Tabak was found guilty of murder. The jury rejected his claim that Joanna's death had been accidental. During sentencing, the judge described the crime as a terrible tragedy that had devastated Joanna's family and friends. Tabak was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term that he must serve before becoming eligible to apply for parole. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the offence while recognising that under the UK law, a life sentence does not always mean life imprisonment for the rest of a person's life. For Joanna's loved ones, the verdict brought justice, but it could never undo what had happened. While the criminal case had concluded, another important story remained. Christopher Jeffries, the man whose arrest had made national headlines. Although he had been released without any charge within days, sections of the British press had portrayed him in deeply unfair and damaging ways. Newspapers published speculative stories about his appearance, personality, and private life. Many readers assumed he was guilty before any evidence had been presented. In reality, he was completely innocent. Christopher Jeffries later brought successful legal actions against several newspapers for defamation and received substantial damages. His treatment became one of the most widely discussed examples of trial by media in modern Britain. More than a decade later, the murder of Joanna is remembered for several reasons. It was a complex investigation solved through careful detective work and forensic science. It highlighted the importance of allowing evidence, not assumptions, to guide an investigation, and it exposed dangers of sensational media coverage while criminal investigations are still unfolding. Today, journalists, police officers, and legal professionals still refer to this case when discussing responsible reporting and the presumption of innocence. Amid the headlines, court proceedings, and public debate, it is important not to lose sight of the person at the centre of the story. Joanna was much more than a victim of a crime. She was a daughter, a partner, a friend, a talented landscape architect with a future full of promise. Those who knew her remember her with warmth, intelligence, and her love for life. Her family have continued to honour her memory with dignity and grace, asking for her to be remembered for who she was, not only for the way her life ended. The investigation into Joanna's murder ultimately brought the person responsible to justice, but it also left behind important lessons. Lessons about the value of meticulous police work, the power of forensic evidence, the responsibility of the media, and the importance of resisting the temptation to judge before facts are known. Even today, this case continues to be studied, not only because of the crime itself, but because of everything it revealed about justice, journalism, and public trust. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing to Midnight Archives for more respectful, fact-based investigations into some of history's most compelling mysteries. And if there's another case you'd like us to cover, let us know in the comments below. Until the next time, stay curious and thank you for watching.